Hello everyone, and welcome to episode 1 of our beginner tutorial series for Blender 2.8. So today what we're going to be talking about is basic controls and and where certain properties and panels are in Blender 2.8. So this is going to be a pretty easy video. But this is a very important video if you're a beginner and you don't know how to control the camera or where certain things are in the viewport. So we're not going to talk about everything that Blender has in this video, but it's going to be kind of like a prep for in the future videos when we actually start modeling stuff and kind of learn as we go. So right here I have Blender 2.8 with release candidate 3. So by the time this video comes out, Blender 2.8 will probably be officially released, but this is pretty much the final version of Blender 2.8. Only thing left really is bug fixes. So when you launch Blender, this is the screen that you'll see. So you see there's a nice little splash image of the new Blender Open Movie Spring. And you can see we have some options here that we can choose. If you want, you can make a new file with a specific workflow in mind, or you can open your recent files. You can also recover session, etc. But in this case, all we're going to do is we're going to click on the outside of it to just close that splash screen. And that's it. We're in a new clean version of Blender. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the 3D viewport. And before I do anything, don't mind this, I'm going to make sure I have screencast keys on. And I will also make it a bit bigger so you can see all the hotkeys that I'm pressing on screen. So if you don't know what I press, just look to the bottom left. So starting off, we're going to talk about the 3D viewport. Now this is where this cube is and all these buttons on the around this big boxed in area is. So this is the 3D viewport. Now this is where you're going to be doing a majority of your work, unless you're doing like video compositing or anything like that. This is where you're going to be modeling. You're going to see your renders through this view. You're going to be editing your objects. You're going to be doing everything here. Animation, 2D drawing with the grease pencil if that's what you're interested in. So this is the viewport. Now the controls are very simple. So the way you move the camera in Blender is you always move around a central point. By default, it's this cube right here, and the way you move is you press down your middle mouse button on your mouse, and when you drag, you'll see that the camera kind of orbits around the object. If you want to change the object that you're orbiting around, it's really easy. Whatever you have selected in the scene, and when you press period on the numpad, it'll snap to that object. So in this case, you can see this little dot right here. This is a point light. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to left click on it. And when I press period on the numpad, you'll see I zoom into it. And now when I press down the middle mouse button, I'm now panning around this object. I am pressing and holding, mind you. So very simple if you want to focus on different objects in your scene. And if you want to zoom in and out, it is just scroll up and down. So I'm going to scroll wheel down and you can see I'm zooming out. Now, let's say you don't have to refocus on every object. If you just want to look around an object, what you can actually do is you can pan your camera. Now, if you want to pan your camera, if you hold down Shift and then drag with the mouse button pressed down, you can see I'm panning across the screen here. So for example, let's say I wanted to look around this cube a bit more. So I'm going to click on the cube, press period to zoom in. I'm going to scroll out a bit. So you can see I can pan around the camera. But let's say I want to move upward a bit. I can hold down Shift, drag the mouse up. And now I'm kind of orbiting up here. So there's all sorts of ways to control your camera. But again, I'll be talking about some more of the weird things later on. So. Also in the 3D viewport, what we have are all these buttons around it. So you can see we have this top row of buttons. We have some side buttons over here and some buttons kind of floating in the corner. We're not going to be talking about all of these again, but just know that most of these have some pretty important purposes with rendering or editing your object. For example, you have your axis up here. So you can see if you click and drag this, it's like holding down the middle mouse button. You can also snap to a certain side, like say you want to snap along the x-axis to see this side of this cube. If you click on the x, you'll snap to the side. There is a hotkey for this. If you press 3 on the numpad, you'll snap to the x, and if you press 1 on the numpad, you'll snap to the y. If you want to snap to the top, which is the z, you can press 7. And if you want to do the inverse of all these buttons, say you want to snap to the back of the x-axis, if you hold down Control and press these same buttons, it'll do the opposite. So again, you don't have to remember all of this for now. Maybe practice a bit with the camera if you have to. On the left here, you can see that we have some tools. These change based off what mode you're in. You can hover over most of the tools and see what they do. So for example, with the cube selected, I can press Scale, and when I press it, if I select any of these little cubes that pop up, you can see I'm going to start scaling on those selected axes, I believe. Axes, whatever that is, the plural for axis. So you can scale objects this way. You can also, I believe, grab just the whole object and scale like that. And of course, there's hotkeys for all this. Press S to scale, but we're going to be talking about those more later on. There's more buttons up here, so if you wanted to go into a rendered view, you can press this far right button that says Viewport Shading. If you press that, you'll go into the rendered view for whatever mode you're in. In this case, I'm in Cycles. Don't worry about that, but just know that's how if you wanted to get a preview of the final render, you can press Render. If you want to go back, you can press Solid Shading, which is this one right here. There's also some more buttons up here on the right, but we're going to be using hotkeys for most of these, so don't worry about those. Next, we're going to be talking about splitting views and different layouts you can do for your scene. So Blender is very customizable with your scene layout. So for example, let's say I wanted a window up here and the 3D viewport down here. What you can do is you can go to the side panel, see how my cursor turns into a little drag arrow. What I'm going to do is right click and click Split Area. And sorry, that went a little fast. I'm going to fix that real quick. But you see if I hit Split Area, you can see a little line that pops up, and then when I left click a second time, it makes a little split there, so I can then drag around my windows. I don't personally use this too much, but if you're someone who likes customizing your viewports, that's one way you can do it. And if you want to get rid of this, you just right click on that same seam right there and then hit Join Area, and whatever window you click on, it'll merge into that window. So we're going to do that real quick. There's also the Collections panel on the right up here, on the top right. These are all the objects in your scene. So you see if with the cube highlighted, the cube object up here is selected. I can also click on the light. You see now the light selected, the camera, etc. So this is just a nice way to organize your scene. You can also add more collections. So you can see I can press this little button up here that says New Collection. And I can name, or I'll just leave it named Collection 2. And you can see with the cube selected, I can click and drag into Collection 2. And if I click on a visibility tab on the collection, you'll see that all the objects in this collection will disappear from the viewport. So I have a camera and a light. If I click this little eyeball, they're gone. And I can click it again to bring them all back. So collections are nice for organizing really big scenes, or making it easier to get around a scene if you want to like hide certain objects. So another thing we want to talk about are tabs. Now, this is a really cool feature they added to Blender 2.8. All these tabs up here are pre-made by the development team. Sorry, excuse that. So basically, you can click on any of these tabs, and corresponding to the name, it'll give you a nice little layout for that workflow. So let's say you wanted to start 3D modeling. I'm going to have my cube selected. So when I click on modeling, you see we automatically go into edit mode. Sculpting, you'll get a nice sculpting view with the sculpting brushes on the side. UV editing, texture paint, shading, animation. There's all sorts of things. I do a lot of my work in layout. Sometimes I switch for shading because this is a pretty nice view. But just know there's little tabs up here you can use to change your view. There's also a little plus button so you can save the current workspace and give it a name. So a lot of customizations available. And the last thing we're going to be talking about in this video is the side panel. Now the side panel has a lot of important things. One good way to organize the side panel in your head is if you look at, it's kind of split up like this. So the top split up here is just one option. It's usually relating to your tools. So in this case, if I change to the Move tool over here, you can see it changes to like orientation settings for the Move tool. If I change it to the rotation, or maybe let's do transformation, you can see there's some settings specifically for the transformations, grease pencil, measuring tool. There's all sorts of things. The next few tabs are relating to either your final render for your scene or the world itself. So you can see this one is for this one's for render, if you see it right there. This one's for output, so how your files are saved. There's layers. I believe this one is environment. No, sorry, this is the scene tab. So basically you have all these little tabs here for your world and stuff like that. Again, don't worry about it. We'll talk about it more later. And then the next few are all about your object that you have selected. So a lot of these are kind of confusing to explain without any context. So just know that this next split right here is usually for your objects. And the last one's for custom textures or brushes. Maybe just brushes? No, I think they're also for textures. I don't know why it just says brush up here, but yeah, so brushes are textures. So yeah, that's about it for this video. I know there's a lot of information to take in, but don't worry, we're going to be kind of splitting it up as we go along. Just make sure you stick with it. If you don't know what something is, feel free to Google it or ask down in the comments. Blender is very easy, and 2.8 makes it really easy to learn as a beginner. So even if you've never used a 3D program before, or you're coming from something like Maya, just stick with it and you'll learn it in no time. So thanks for watching episode 1, and if you go into the next episode, we're going to get a little bit more in depth about modeling, how things work in Blender. So again, thanks for watching and have a good one.